Call to order. Adoption of agenda. Can I have a seconder?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Adoption of minutes, 3.1 recommendation.
The council adopted minutes from the regular council meeting held on November the 20th, 2019.
Can I have a seconder?
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah. You have a spelling error, page 10 there, 1343. Then eat instead of east.
So you put that one? And I-
Oh, yeah.
Where?
Advised that the post office replenishes. Represented from the back.
Each. Okay. Instead of east. And
I thought about that.
Okay. On page 11, you have seconded instead of seconded.
Oh. Okay.
And I'll repeat that again in the next one.
Barb's phone. All in favor? 3.3 recommendation.
The council adopted minutes at the special council meeting held November the 26th.
Second.
Discussion? All in
With
favor?
corrections?
With corrections? 3.3 recommendation.
The council adopted minutes of the regular council meeting held on December the 4th,
She's
2019.
got it here.
Second.
Discussion?
Page 13.
Yeah.
Okay. All, any other discussion? All in favor? Introduction of late items. We have 8.6 from the Scouts. We have 8.7 for the fire truck. And we have 9.7 for a letter that I need to sign for the Caribou Leadership Roundtable Agreement, follow-up. And-
What was the next one?
9.7. And then we have a late item of 9.8, Selena Robinson, Lincoln newsletter. Have we got that? Hmm?
And none.
Oh, I missed 9.9. And 9.9, based off the arson people.
Yep, everyone has them, they're all together.
It's stuck together.
Donna, you should have a package of 4.
And this one?
No, that's your delegation. No, that's the delegate 1.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
And introducing, so public hearing, none, delegation 6.1 recommendation. Can I have some feedback?
That council hear the delegation from Dale Roth and Lori Vickers from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy Air Quality Assessment.
Can I have a second?
Do you want us to get Lori on the phone now? Or do you want to do that? Okay.
And you're on, Dale.
Yeah, but we're also, there's another lady that's supposed to be with us, but she's going to join us back home.
The number you have called.
It's not long since we got. Oh, well. It's barely up in my face. I told my face like a car.
Sound like they don't know what you look like.
I don't know any of them very often.
Hello, Lori speaking.
Hi Lori, it's Sandy from the Village of Poos.
Hey Sandy, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Good, thanks.
I have all council is here listening to you and Gail's here too. So
Hi everyone.
we're just starting the delegation.
Okay, go ahead, Dale.
Great. So good evening. As you know, my name is Gail Roth. I'm with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, and I'm one of the regional air quality meteorologists with the ministry. The village here had requested that we come and present on open burning, and so the presentation is essentially focused at a broad brushstroke around the legislation related to open burning that we have in the province. So briefly, there's a bit of background information regarding biomass burning air quality and a very brief touch on how that pertains to public health as well. And then we'll spend one slide on an overview of the different regulations and acts that apply to open burning specifically, and a little more detail related to the open burning smoke control regulation, which is one of the pieces, sort of a main piece of legislation around open burning. And then look at sort of provincial and municipal roles and how those work together. So there's obviously many different types of biomass burning. It can include things like residential wood burning and open burning. Open burning specifically means it's open to the outdoor environment, so it's not in an incinerator. It's essentially in some sort of pile, lit out in the outdoor environment and lit. So open burning examples include residential backyard burning, so for yard waste, for example. Forestry slash piles is a big source of open burning in the province. Agriculture has different types of open burning activities, as well as prescribed burns, so for wildfire control and wildfires themselves. When we look at smoke in general from these types of activities, they represent quite a significant source of particulate matter across the province in terms of what's contributed into the atmosphere. And particulate matter itself is a type of air, it's classified as an air pollutant. It comes from many sources. It's essentially the types of particles that we're concerned about in the air are the microscopic ones. So the ones you really can't see individually with your eye. And to give you perspective, the image on the top left, that gray, I don't know how to describe it blowing up, but that's essentially a piece of human hair that's magnified. And the size of particles that we mostly pay attention to are the blue dots, which is what we call PM10. So that's a particle that's 10 micrometers in diameter, and all particles smaller. And then you can see the pink dots on the blue dot, and it's a subset of PM10. So those are 2.5 micrometers in diameter and smaller. So that's incredibly small. The PM2.5 fraction primarily originates from combustion. So vehicles, smoke from burning, any combustion type activity is in that size fraction. Whereas PM10 we still track, it's more related to mechanical breakdown, so it could be dust or pollen, and those types of particles are between 2.5 and 10. Anything larger than that, it becomes more in the nuisance category, and because it doesn't tend to stay suspended in the atmosphere for a longer period of time, so there's a reduced potential for exposure to people. But also in terms of these fine particles, the research clearly has shown over the past 2 or 3 decades that there is clear association with both short and long-term health impacts when people respire these particles in. And there's quite a range of illnesses. I won't touch on all of them, but the initial research really clearly has shown relation to cardiovascular as well as respiratory impacts. But newer research coming out is showing even additional impacts beyond those systems. There's particular sensitivity to certain subpopulations that show a stronger negative reaction to exposure to particulate matter. And that, in general, are elderly, those with pre-existing diseases, children, and pregnant women as well. So, but essentially the healthier you are, the more robust you are and can withstand these pollutants better. And the research also shows that with this particular pollutant, it doesn't matter how low you get, even at low concentrations, when they look at large populations, they can still measure health impacts associated with exposure. So we have standards that we use. It's not zero because it's a bit unrealistic. The natural environment contains these particles as well. So we do have standards we use to guide things like industrial permitting. But it's done with the idea and the premise that you always, wherever we're creating activity that's generating those pollutions, we want to try to reduce that as much as we reasonably can, balancing that off that, we have life and there's things that happen. So it's always trying to find that reasonable balance, but there's always reason to reduce it wherever possible.
Can I ask you a question? How do you find out that diabetes is caused from this pollution matters?
I think that's one of the newer outcomes. So I would say that those are still currently under research, but they do different types of studies where they're looking at different populations and they can see trends, for example, that when people are exposed to these higher levels they see associations between the outcomes of these different diseases and the pollution levels. Some of those in there are, they may not be completely widely accepted across the health community yet, but there's indications that they need to continue to study those areas. Mm-hmm.
So there's a high rate of diabetes and Beijing.
I don't know about that.
But Alzheimer's, depression, stroke, autism.
And a good way to consider the health impacts here is that it's really it's an aggravating factor. Sometimes it can be a direct cause, but in particular where someone may be susceptible to a particular health outcome, being exposed to air pollution is one method that creates systemic chronic inflammation in your body. And so particularly for chronic exposure, people in Beijing that are exposed to high levels on quite a regular basis, it will create this inflammation in their body, and then you end up with tipping points and that kind of thing.
Systemic being a key word there.
Yeah. So, but it's, in terms of air quality, it's important, someone smokes cigarettes has a huge impact to them as an individual, whereas the magnitude of impact per individual is smaller for outdoor air pollution, but the important factor is it's impacting everyone. So it's a wide exposure that way. But it's also not meant to be alarmist. Like, I think it's often sometimes smoke or pollution's just thought, oh, well, it's just there. And it's, there's lots of other health factors that are incredibly important to consider in the whole realm of our health in general, but this is one that there's a clear demonstration that there are impacts, so it's important to be aware of that. So with regards to open burning specifically, within our ministry, the main act that legislation falls under is the Environmental Management Act. And that act essentially, at the principal level, prohibits waste from being introduced into the environment.
So how come they haven't done anything about Victoria, the water or the sewer?
Because within that, there's a little bit more to it's not that simple. So that's the premise, is that waste should not cause pollution, and pollution has a legal definition to it. The Act also defines sort of prescribed, what they call prescribed industry, trade, business, or activities. So there's these different activities and industries that can occur. And if they're defined as one of these prescribed activities, then they must either follow an existing regulation. So that would be a good example, the open burning smoke control regulation, where open burning of vegetative material is a prescribed activity. And so then anyone wanting to do that practice should follow the regulation. There's more detail I still need to get through there. It's not that straightforward. Same with industry. So if they're a prescribed industry, they must come through our ministry to obtain a permit that then evaluates what is an acceptable amount of waste introduction into the environment to avoid, sort of this legal definition of pollution, which is evaluated on case-by-case basis. So that's sort of, it's just a very broad, acts are very broad, so we do have to look at cases to sort of get into the nitty-gritty.
So how do we get Victoria dealt with then? How do we do that? they're complaining about our oil and gas industry. So we want to complain about their raw sewage running into the ocean.
Yeah, I can't answer that. That's sort of off topic for what I can, like, I'm an air quality meteorologist, so I can certainly direct you to the policy folks that would look at those
I
specific
think they have a
questions.
processing plant pretty much ready to come along.
So within the Act, there's supporting regulations, and an important one is the waste discharge regulation, and that's the regulation that lists which industries are prescribed or activities are prescribed. It also lists in terms of open burning what materials are prohibited that no one can burn or incinerate. So as I said, we'll look at the open burning smoke control regulation in a little bit more detail. Lori is from the Ministry of Agriculture, and she'll touch on the Farm Practices Protection Act.
Donna?
Make a motion to go over 15 minutes.
Yeah. Can I have a second?
And where, you know, within the open burning smoke control regulation, there are exemptions, and we'll look at those. But where there's exemptions, sometimes there's other acts that, like the Wildfire Act and Weed Control Act, that deal with burning of some type that you have to look towards as well. And in terms of agricultural burning, some of it falls under the open burning smoke control regulation, and some falls under farm practices.
I have in regarding to agriculture. What do the farmers do out in the rural areas with their old bales? Do they burn them? Do they have to go to the regional district and get a permit, or do they just like?
Yeah, that role will cover that, and coming up here, and Lori can speak to some of that as well. So with the regulation itself, again, I really stress this relates to open fire combustion and vegetative debris. We get a lot of questions about, can I burn my cabin down? It does not apply to this regulation. This applies to vegetative debris from which the land originated. That's it. So it includes activities such as land clearing, forestry operations, and slash piles. Some agriculture, silviculture activities, there's a bit of nuance there we'll talk about. Things like wildfire risk reduction plans apply. Again, there's some nuance around some of these activities as well. Wildlife habitat enhancements, or where there's utility right-of-ways being cleared. Things that are exempt from the regulation are under the Fire Services Act, firefighters have to do different types of training that involve open burning, so that does not apply. Resource management, so fires, so prescribed burns under the Wildfire Act would be an example. And then there's a specific exemption, and this is actually within the Environmental Management Act itself. So for domestic or agricultural purposes, if you're burning leaves, foliage, weeds, crops, or stubble, it's exempt from the regulation. So that partly answers your question there.
No. Gary, this is perfect, thank you.
Okay, yeah, and we're happy to answer questions now and even going forward into the future.
It's good information. Can we get a copy of it? We do have a copy.
Yeah.
So what happens when we had an incident of somebody burning bales on agriculture property, but within the boundaries of Poos, and him getting fined? Or he didn't get, he got a warning.
Yeah, I'll touch on that.
Okay.
Let me get through it, and then we will address that specific case for you.
Chris, thanks, Your Worship. This line here, I recall seeing something in the ventilation index that actually seems to contradict that. And it was that, burning of debris in residential areas, you could only burn leaves and other grass if there was no compost site available, and that any wood for campfires or any backyard burning had to be seasoned for a minimum of 6 months.
So that applies to the regulation itself for materials that are required to follow the regulation.
Okay.
When we're talking about backyard burning, the regulation doesn't apply. But I'll get to where we can address that particular source if you like. Campfires also don't apply, and I'll show you exactly what a campfire means.
Not a bail.
As long as you have a hot dog there, yes.
So in addition to, the specific requirements under the regulation, local governments have the power to make bylaw requirements. I'll talk again in an upcoming slides in more specifics. If there's bylaws from a municipality that relate to open burning, they must be abided by in addition to the provincial regulation. And the open burning regulation specifies that any municipal existing bylaw must also be followed. If there's any other provincial regulation, for example, Wildfire Act in the summer will put burn bans on for safety reasons, must follow that. So essentially you can't act contrary to any other legislation. It's not authorized. As well, there are cases when the regulation is being followed and pollution can still occur, and everyone's doing what they're supposed to do.
The venting index.
Well, even when that's followed, because there's requirements in the regulation around the venting index, there have been cases where it's micrometeorology or there's nothing in the regulation about trying to control everyone across the landscape at a time. So you can have cases where ventilation index says yes, you can burn under the regulation, and everybody and their uncle likes that, and you just get still saturation of the atmosphere, and it creates essentially a public health hazard. Within the open burning smoke control regulation, our ministry has a director within our ministry has the power to issue a burning prohibition. So even if everyone's following the rules and it's determined that pollution in the legal sense is occurring, we will issue a burn ban, and even if the regulation says you can operate, you cannot if the burn ban's in place. So that's sort of the last, hopefully a unique case. We don't like to issue them all the time. The regulation should serve enough protection in most cases. As well, local fire departments may have reasons or conditions where bans are implemented, and if those exist, they must also be followed. At the local scale, every municipality is different. I believe you guys require burning permits here. Some don't, some do. If their requirement obviously has to be followed. As well, essentially the larger fires, I'll show you an infographic here about what a category 3 fire actually means. Essentially, if you're doing a large number of fire piles or many, you must obtain a burn registration number from the BC Wildfire Service for burning. So going back to the idea of a campfire, there's actually a legal description of it. For the purposes of today, we'll say half meter by half meter. There's things called category 2 fires for simplicity, sort of like a medium-sized fire. Category 3 fires are either very large fires or you have many small piles. And there's more nuance in there, but for the sake of time tonight, we'll leave it at that, but can certainly look at those details in upcoming conversations.
Well, we have people that light fire works off all the time, and they don't get burning permits or anything. They just decide to light them off whenever they feel like it.
Yeah, fireworks wouldn't apply under the open burning. As far as I'm aware, we don't have provincial regulations on that. It might be more local.
We have a municipal bylaw.
Right. Yeah, because really in any provincial regulation, we really operate at what is suitable for every community across the entire province. And in cases where we can't apply that to everyone, that's when it really comes down to the municipality to make sure that it's suitable for that individual locality. Yeah. Okay, so some general requirements. Again, this is very high level for tonight. In general, within the regulation, the expectation is that when anyone is conducting burning, every reasonable alternative to minimize burning should be enacted. So if there's an opportunity to reuse, recycle, reduce vegetative debris, I know around Prince Georgiana, there's a lot of slash that will go to the pellet plants instead of being burned. That's a good example. That should be done, and that is a requirement of the regulation. As well, all efforts when burning is occurring to minimize smoke, and that really is getting around best practices about burning. For slash piles, sometimes there's a lot of soil or wet material in there, and it creates a lot of smoke. So the intent is that that's not done, and you follow best practices to really promote the most efficient combustion possible. And again, that prohibited materials are not included in the piles. It's vegetative debris. The regulation is quite comprehensive, but to really just speak to it generally, a lot of it is aimed at, we want to minimize exposure to the public with burning. So the new regulation, it was just updated in September. It has what we call smoke sensitivity zones, and you can see the provincial map there with the different colors on it are showing those zones. So the very pink areas are essentially more populated or densely populated areas.
That's the high?
That's the high, yeah. And the orange is medium, and so that's either a lower density populated area or a transportation corridor. And then the low is the white, which is quite remote. So these smoke sensitivity zones are referenced throughout the regulation, and the intent is that there's more restrictions obviously in the high, somewhat less in the medium, and the least amount of restrictions in the low zone. And you can see in the blow up there at the top right that Kupi is in a high sensitivity zone. So it would take me hours to go through the whole regulation with you, but essentially there's conditions regarding these zones for things like minimum setback distances, ventilation requirements, which you guys have brought up already, how long a burn can last, like for 1 day up to, in low zones I think it's up to 4 days, and things around adding material, what time a burn can start, when it should end, and that's all to favor ventilation and dispersion.
So how did Poos become high sensitivity?
Who's become?
How come Poos has? How did it become high
It
sensitivity?
must have met
Because
the density criteria, yeah. Within the regulation, there are special provisions. So it's in addition to sort of the smoke sensitivity zone concept. Things like when there's activities, if there's a wildfire risk reduction plan or disease vegetation and burnings required, those types of activities, they have to follow the regulation, but there's a relaxation of rules because there's other concerns around environmental health or public safety with regards to those activities. So the regulation does not want to prohibit those activities when there could be other negative consequences to happen. So there's some rules, but they don't have to follow the full regulation. There's rules around dry land sort areas, but we'll leave that for today. I don't think it's not likely directly applicable to your concerns. And also when people use these air curtain incinerators, they're big boxes that have sort of gas-fired combustion within them. They result in much more efficient combustion. They throw the vegetation into these bins and it's burnt. So a lot less smoke. So if people are using those appliances, there's less restrictions as well. Going back up to the agriculture and residential, we're getting a bit more specific into the regulation here. People are burning materials that are less than 3 centimeters in diameter, so very small branches and tiny needles and such. It doesn't apply to the regulation, they're exempt. So that's where backyard burning, if someone's burning grass, that kind of thing, they're exempt.
Excuse me, I need a motion to succeed a little longer.
Make the motion.
Can I get a second?
Second.
We're almost done. If the material's 3 to 10 centimeters in diameter, and this is even components of the pile, have this in it. The regulation applies, but again, there's a relaxation of some of the rules. And for piles that contain branches or stumps, for example, that are larger than 10 centimeters in diameter, the full regulation applies. And then again, as I mentioned before, all those other pieces of legislation still must be abided by. This is the last slide here. So we alluded to this a little bit already. Provincial government administers provincial acts and regulations. And again, we have a provincial lens. So those are meant to apply to everyone across the province. And our ministry with environment, we regulate pollution from any of those prescribed industries or business activities as well. And we also develop provincial ambient air quality standards and guidelines. So that provides guidance around decision making. For example, if we had to issue an advisory or a burning prohibition, where we are looking at those types of numbers to help guide decision making. And then we also do a lot of support for stewardship, public education and outreach. What I don't have on there that may be interest, I was chatting with Lori as well. Our ministries really support, if there is interest to look at municipal bylaws, from our perspective, that would include air quality management of some form. We definitely support the municipalities to make sure things align with provincial legislation, and we work with many communities so we can share knowledge that may be valuable or of interest. For local government, certainly has the power to administer and develop their own bylaws. Examples of air quality ones across the province would include sort of these clean air bylaws around things like residential wood heating, open burning, and this is where the backyard burning comes in. If you so desire, if there's a need to, you can look at how to legislate those types of activities. Vehicle idling and dust management are some common examples of local bylaws. And again, they must align with the provincial legislation, and they can't be less stringent, but they can be more stringent. As well, when there's documents like land use planning, regional growth strategy, sustainability plans, those types of documents are incredibly valuable to consider from the air quality perspective, where the conflicts might occur. Some of the most challenging cases we have are historical cases where the land use neighbors are not ideal, and it really creates difficult situations to find successful solutions where people aren't being impacted. So it's definitely something to consider in the planning phases. And again, I guess you guys probably do a lot of stewardship and education and outreach where possible, but our ministries, mine is specifically related to air quality, can support municipalities to do that as well. And then the last slides here, if you get the electronic copy, those are active links that will take you to some really helpful web pages on the topics. And even the bottom here, the province has an inventory of different local bylaws related to air quality topics that we've had a summer student compile across the province about different bylaws. So it's a useful resource. That's the last slide. I don't know, for the purposes of tonight, there's certainly opportunity to have additional conversations about specific cases or specific questions. I can either address some of them tonight or at a later time as well. And then Lori on the phone was going to just add, so you saw where there's some exemption with an agricultural activity that doesn't fall under the open burning smoke control regulation. There's still some wording and legislation around burning activity from the agricultural side that Lori might be able to elucidate as well.
Does anybody have any questions?
I have a few. Municipal open burning backyard fires.
Yeah.
Do other municipalities look at restrictions, like if every house on the street had a fire at the same night, the weather has an impact? And the next street over, they're complaining about smoke or whatever. How do we regulate that?
There's a number of different approaches. So some communities will have very strict specifications around how big those fires can be to try to reduce the amount of smoke. That within the province itself, sometimes in communities it's known that people are putting things in fires that are actually illegal to burn, and
Yes.
that can create smoke. That already is illegal under a provincial regulation. So depending on the situation, but if it's, people just burning wood, you can, I can't think of a community, not to say it doesn't exist, that people have outright banned it. I know it was a topic. In Prince George is quite restrictive around, there's no open burning permitted in the city of Prince George, for example, except they do allow these backyard campfires because it was really unpopular with the public because people very much enjoy those activities, but they have specifications around how big these fires can be. And then if it still became a problem, I think that's where, in their case, they would use bylaw officers, but to address sort of these nuisance type activities. But for small communities, sometimes that's a particular challenge because I know some communities don't even have bylaw officers, so it's about the approach and how do you want to handle these things. Yeah. But in terms of like burning garbage and that kind of thing, that's already illegal under provincial legislation.
Do they require a permit or that to burn bales in agricultural land within a municipality? Do they require a permit?
The municipality could require one, but that's a municipal decision.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you, as the environment, you don't request that. That's like a regional district bylaw or a municipal bylaw?
Yes, and there's probably some information that Lori can share around best practices and what would be expected, because, you can burn hay bales or you could separate them out and be considerate around when you're burning to minimize your impact. Under the open burning smoke control regulation specifically, it is exempt, but it doesn't mean that there isn't sort of, I guess under the Environmental Management Act, so the main act itself, there's wording around not creating pollution. So in the end, if someone creates pollution, regardless of their activity, and it's a public health hazard and it's quite a substantial impact, there is...
Depending upon the definition of pollution.
That's right, yeah. So, and that's where, you have to get into these case-by-case situations, but essentially if it's creating a public health hazard, both the Farm Practices Act and the Environmental Management Act have wording to protect around that. So it then gets back. This is where you get into these detailed cases that you really have to sit down and look at the legislation carefully. But there are some allowances for activities such as agriculture to do. They have, there's a less rigor around the legislation because there's a lot of value to agricultural activity as well. So there's always this balance of how do you allow them to do farming or do, some of these other activities that may have less legislation around them.
Yeah, they couldn't move the bales, they would have to be burnt because they're old
Right.
or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever the reasons are.
So in cases where you have issues cropping up, I guess the question as a municipality is that, is this happening all the time, or is that oh no, this is a public education thing and let's get everyone on the right track. So you can use public education and information. In cases where there's, like in Vail Mount, they have residential wood burning is quite an issue for them, so they're looking at how do we add regulation in there because it's an ongoing, quite a severe issue in that community. So they're looking at a regulatory way to help support less impact in the community.
I think education is so key.
Yeah.
And even within the municipality, because there's stuff going on. We're not the experts, we don't know, we assume, we grant a permit to burn.
Mm-hmm.
And then feathers get ruffled and
Yeah.
people come to visit and and then people's feelings get hurt, and maybe we should never have issued that permit to burn in the first place. And when you go to, enforcement issues, I don't know if there was a way that the municipality that approved something could be included in that educational process in addition to any particular individual who may be affected. Then it would be a true learning experience for us all.
Yeah, right. And there are cases where, the municipality can issue the permit, but then it's just awareness about what's also the provincial regulation. And we have to make sure we have all the ducks in a row and all the boxes checked. Okay, then we can burn. And that can be done through things like fact sheets or different awareness campaigns. And it's really combining all those things together so that, so everyone's aware of sort of what the bounds are. Yeah.
Oh, we had a situation in the community, in which I'm sure you're aware. And it everybody looked bad, from the individual to the ministry to the enforcement to the municipality. And if we can turn that around for the future and learn from it and make it a positive, turn this incident into a positive learning incident, I think then it's worth its weight in gold.
What about a table set up on July 1st talking about fires? There's lots of people here that do agriculture. A lot of municipal people have fires in their backyard. They need to be reminded that they can't just bury that old shed that they're tearing apart piece by piece in their bonfire.
Right, yeah.
Well, you look at tipping fees, right? And it's a lot less expensive to burn something.
But we do waive our tipping fees twice a year, spring and fall.
Yeah, and so these are all the types of management actions that can be sort of discussed going forward. I should give Lori an opportunity to speak to the agricultural part, but we are here to support those conversations and even, maybe look at the particular incident that things didn't go as well as we all hoped, and this is not what we want to see in the future, and we can sort of look at that in detail and see, is this education materials that need to be developed? Is there a municipal, is that actually necessary in these cases or not? Sometimes you get these one-off cases.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that, that we have to put all these regulations in place, or is it an education piece? Yeah. So those are the questions that we don't have probably time tonight to talk about, but the ministry is always here to support you in those conversations.
We know next time.
Yeah, but I'll leave it to you from there if you want some comments from Lori specifically as well.
Do you have any questions for Lori?
How are you doing, Lori?
Good. No, I just had myself on mute, so you didn't hear my background noise, but I think I got most of what was going on. So do you want me to give a quick overview from the Ministry of Agriculture's perspective?
Please.
Okay, so just really briefly, so like Dale touched on, we have the Right to Farm Act, or officially called the Farm Practices Protection Act. And what that act does is it basically addresses nuisance concerns. So it addresses things like noise, odor, and dust. And how it basically works is it allows for so first of all, I guess it's not a guarantee for a farm operation to, they can't do whatever they want because they have the Right to Farm Act control of them. In order for the act to apply, it requires that the farm operation uses, quote, normal farm practices, and that it doesn't contravene other legislation. So like the Environmental Management Act, like Gail was referring to, the Right to Farm Act doesn't trump any of those regulations, or the Public Health Act. Second, so what the Right to Farm Act does do is when the farm operation does follow those requirements, so is doing normal farm practices and not contravening any other sort of legislation, it protects the farmer from an injunction from the court or from any nuisance complaints related to the operation of the farm. So if the operation is also in the agricultural land reserve, which I understand, could be has some land in the AOR as well, it also protects the farmer basically it doesn't allow, it protects the farmers from any, a bylaw or any sort of rule local government might make related to things like animal control, noise, or nuisance. So basically what it means is it makes it difficult for local government to prohibit normal farm practices on the outland land. So, does that make sense?
It does.
Yes.
Okay. So, one of the things I guess I'll point to, so we're talking about burning in particular. So, some agriculture activities, like Gail mentioned, are exempt from the open burning regulation, especially if we're talking about burning vegetation debris that's under 3 centimeters in size. So that would include things like hay, you know, the piece of forage on the hay is less than 3 centimeters, or even like standing crops. And the reason why I bring standing crops up is there's lots of standing crops out in the piece right now. I'm not sure what's going to happen to a lot of them come spring. I imagine a lot of them will be, there's more value, so there's more value in returning that crop to the land than burning it, so that's what a lot of producers do. However, there are some people that are very likely going to be burning crops this spring. So it's kind of a heads up that we might see some burning this spring that we haven't in the past. So those small, if your vegetation debris is the 3 centimeters, so you're not, the open burning regulation doesn't apply. However, it doesn't preclude local government from creating your own, from creating your own bylaws that need to be adhered to. So again, like Gail said, we're here as a resource if you guys are trying to create bylaws. We can help point you, we can provide some advice based on the goals you're trying to accomplish with your bylaws on how to word them. So just for example, just doing a bit of a scan of some of the bylaws across the province. You know, some local governments have bylaws in place around burning that allows for agriculture activities, but still does put some restrictions on it. So they'll do things like, some will require permits. I know one of the questions was, do you need a permit? Well, it's basically up to local government if they want to be issuing permits for burning or if they want to allow burning outright under certain conditions. And then some of those conditions could be stated in your bylaw, like, there's some local governments, especially in the Okanagan, those areas where there's high fire areas, they'll say only seasonal burning is allowed in the winter. You're not allowed to burn in the summer, period. Maybe it says you're only allowed to burn when the ventilation index is at a minimum good. There could be restrictions around weather, like if the weather isn't suitable, if it's windy or if we're expecting diversions, that would preclude you from burning.
Point of order, could I extend the
We've already
presentation
extended
for
it. We've already extended it.
To the maximum?
to the map?
There is no max. Once you go past
Okay.
15, you're done. Just keep going.
Sorry, I apologize.
Sorry, was that a question for me or you guys?
No.
Is that what's happening here? You guys are explaining it?
No, go ahead.
Okay, and I guess the last thing too, that's in most burning bylaws is basically, if there's a fire ban put in place, either by the local fire chief or by the province, through BC wildfire, nobody's allowed to burn, no matter what. Nobody can take the right to farm act and say, I'm allowed to burn in front of agriculture streets, or no. There's other legislation that trumps that as well. So, I have a fact sheet on burning. I did pass to Chris and Sandy. I don't know if they passed it on to you guys as well. It's a little bit, it's out of date because it doesn't take into account the regulations Gail was talking about. Because some of that regulation just came out. We haven't had a chance to update it yet. But it does talk about some of the burning that does happen in agriculture. And again, we do encourage, like Gail said, we encourage alternatives to burning where possible. Things like, composting materials or, which we're talking about hay, like, it's got a much larger value to the land base by returning it back and composting it than it does to be burned. So we always prefer those avenues, but there are situations where burning hay or burning, prunings or for clearing land, burning the vegetation off of it is the way to go. And that, I hate to, when we start talking about defining what a quote normal farm practices, it's very gray. And ultimately we have there's kind of a method to determine that if we end up in a situation where there's conflict, but I don't really want to go there unless you guys want to know more about that process. I don't want to kind of deter from what the conversation is.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So, was that helpful, or you guys
Yes,
have,
it's
I
very
don't think
helpful.
any questions about it. Gail did a great job of answering lots of questions.
She did.
Around agriculture too, so, if there's any gaps, I'm happy to fill them in.
No, I think we've got it.
So
Okay.
we would have your contact information then?
Yes,
We-
I can-
Yeah, and I work over in Fort St. John and at the office in the doctor's place, and I apologize for not being there in person, and I just had some personal stuff, a toddler that prevented me from being mobile tonight, but I am here. Ministry of Agriculture is here, so if we do, and I work with a planner too, so like my background isn't on planning and bylaw, but we do have planners on staff that work with me. So, like Gail said, we review bylaws too. We're happy to extend that service. If you guys want some advice or help or guidance on some bylaws, please reach out. We are here.
That's fantastic. We couldn't ask for anything better. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So she can hang up now, son? Yes. We're gonna
Say
hang
good
up on
night.
her.
Good night. Let you know.
And Gail, you want to stay or you can go home? I imagine you're tired.
Another day. I probably started, so I'm staying overnight in Dawson.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. So, like I said, she's got our contact information and we can do stuff by phone or if it's needed in person. We do travel when necessary to come up. My area is the whole Peace and Dominica, so it's big. And I work with a lot of communities, but like everyone, resources are limited, but we do our best to really support you guys where you need to.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That was an awesome presentation.
What's?
Found out some facts, that's good. Unfinished business arising from the minutes. New business, 8.1 recommendation.
Thank council approve the Peace to be winter jamboree, and that council pick a date and set a budget for the event.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Discussion.
We don't have Mr. King, or do we?
Yeah. Just gotta pick a date.
Oh,
Are we looking March? And we got spring break about then too.
Spring break, when's spring break this year, Chris? Do you know?
We worked around that.
Do you have some dates to bring to us?
Yes.
Oh,
Report.
It's in the
7th and the 14th. They're 2 Saturdays. And spring break is the following 2 weeks after that.
In March?
So it'll be either the first Saturday or second Saturday is what we're suggesting.
What was it last year?
First or second Saturday in March.
No, I know, I'm just trying to
The
remember.
14th, is that the Friday just before Easter?
Would be a Saturday. Should be a Saturday.
Yeah, and the 17th,
I know. 7th?
7th and
7th
7th.
or 14th.
So spring break on School District 59's calendar, is the 16th to the 27th.
so people will be going away, so maybe we should do it on the 7th. Because if, we had a family going away on spring break, if we leave on the 14th, you would be here.
I don't care as long as it's warm.
Well, it can be warm, they need
Last year was
snow.
pretty warm.
They need snow.
Last year was pretty warm, so.
Okay.
It's delightful. And some of our employees might have plans too.
So all in favor for the 7th?
Sure.
Okay.
Budget.
What was last year?
Right there.
We didn't really have a budget last year because it was the first year.
Yeah.
And there's the cost that it was last year,
So
6,900.
$7,000.
Take 15% off.
Why, for you?
I have issues of us spending 7,000 for, winter jamboree, and then we spend 20 or whatever for July 1st. I know that's a sort of a, okay, how much,
Close to
whatever.
30.
Typically, it's over 30, sometimes approaching 40.
Years ago, when we had July 1st down on the bottom of the hill, we charged a toonie per person. And that just sort of offset some of the cost. So now we're doing a winter jamboree in March.
Park, remember?
It was to park.
It was the park farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't a door thing. It wasn't to go in and if you walk down.
No, they paid $2 to park.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, we took that money
Yeah.
to offset. So we're doing a winter jamboree. We did an awesome job last year. We reached out and we asked for volunteers. No one has stepped up, but they love it and it's a good thing, but can we continue to be sustainable in doing these activities? I'm just questioning it. Because our residents aren't participating actively,
We never really asked anybody last year.
but we did ask for volunteers.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
not
we did.
for the jamboree. Oh, well.
And did we get any volunteers?
No,
We never
I think
got
we were
volunteers.
working.
So am I off kilter here to get asked this?
So how about if we put a newsletter out there to ask the residents if they feel their taxes should go to something free? Or should their taxes stay within operations of the village?
In the past, when I did jamboree, it didn't cost the village anything.
We
But
used
how do
to-
you, sorry,
Pardon?
how do you supply the gifts or the prizes?
See, what I did is we asked all the different organizations that wanted to have a fundraising event at the jamboree. They came and they did their own thing. They did their fundraising.
Your scouts and your
The Scouts
brownies.
and the Girl Guides did their cakewalk and the churches did their own fundraising thingies. And the fire department, yes. Fire department.
And that's really what's going on, is that times are changing. Because a lot of these things, there were groups, and there was the recreation, they were involved, brownies, scouts, all of them.
But what we did is we sent out letters to all the different organizations.
Exactly, I mean, it was a community event. This is put on the village.
And stuff.
Yes, staff. And council.
So do you guys want a newsletter out there to ask them? What do you want? Because this, we don't need to sit here and debate that it's the taxpayers' money that we're spending, or we're gonna do it for free. We need to figure out what we're gonna do. So, are we going to?
That's what we're trying to decide, like, do you continue to keep pushing ahead with the same thing, but just no people? Other than us.
Well, we could send out letters to all the different organizations that we have in the village, like the churches and the museum and the library.
They always participate.
I know,
in
but
the
they-
library.
Yeah, well, they would
Yeah.
participate to do their own fundraising, right? So they would supply their own prizes and, but people have to pay. And they have in the past, we never charged more than a quarter. No. And you'd be surprised how many people, how much money we made.
The cakewalk.
The cakewalk was
Was
was 75
This is not as
cents.
simple as just picking a date
Yeah.
and deciding we need to do some more. It's gonna take more work in January when we get back.
And
So
then
do you
we're
want
cutting it pretty close.
council to be involved in helping you plan this and send out the letters, or, yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I think all of the discussion here is definitely valid. And if we step back and look at the core responsibilities of any municipality, it's water, roads, sewer. So, and those
But that's
things.
what I'm saying, we should
So-
need to ask the taxpayers if they want us to fund it, or do they want what we need. We can't just decide that we're not gonna be doing this for the community when we've already started one. So we need to send out a newsletter to say, hey, do you want your money spent on running the town, or do you want us to give you a freebie for a jamboree? I think that's an invalid thing to do.
And I agree. I think that can definitely work too. One thing I do know is looking at, when you mentioned having council involved or staff involved, we like to do this kind of stuff for you guys, for sure, but in terms of asking organizations, can you donate, can you volunteer, can you come to the table with something, rather than having the reception staff make that call to local businesses, it definitely has a lot more impact if that's a letter from mayor and council or something to that effect, so. So yeah, maybe Sandy and I put our heads together in January here in the new year, and we'll come back to you guys with.
Laura, you
We'll
guys
report
busy
some
till the end of the
options.
month?
I'm not here.
You're not here?
Yeah. I don't really only got.
She's got a day and a half.
Yeah, we have two.
Yeah, it's Christmas, I keep coming.
We've got the meeting in January is January the 15th, so if we're choosing March the 7th, there's a solid 6-7 weeks there to.
Yeah, because like the Boy Scouts,
They can do a fundraiser there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do we want to table this until
Well, we can set the date for the 7th, and then we'll do the event.
budget to come?
Yeah, budget to come after we decide who's all coming.
And I agree with that sort of, I mean, and maybe this is me speaking politically a little bit, but I agree with that concept that if it's gonna be a community event, it's nice to have community members come out and support it, right? I know there are other communities in the piece, without really naming names, that have actually scaled back community events on literally that everybody loves to come, everybody wants to help out, sorry, we can't run.
And we do have an awesome community, like our museum, our library, our Puskupi Community Church. They're there every event. They're doing stuff. Yeah, and the other
They all, the
Yeah.
Legion.
Legion, yeah.
And that's the issue. What we tend to see is the same folks, the same organizations stepping up to the plate time and time again. And really, it's not spreading the workload among the community members.
Okay, so we'll take that. Now, will all in favor for the numbers, the date, the 7th?
Okay.
8.2 recommendation.
That the village of Puskupi support the application to the Northern Development Initiative Trust for a grant up to $7,544 for the Puskupi hockey rink board replacement from the Northern Regional Development Account.
That was second.
That's a funny story. When we used to have to tell all the guys out in the yard what they needed, we had to do it over a radio, and I always hated to have to tell them that we needed
So, all in favor? 8.3 recommendation.
The council approved the 2020-2024 fire department operating budget.
I'll second.
Any discussion? Ken, do you have something to say?
Not at this particular point.
All in favor? 8.4 recommendation.
The council received the 2019 capital and special project summary for information. And that the village staff be commended for their outstanding job performance in the 2019 calendar year.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Kudos.
Kudos to the village
We
staff.
have awesome
They're
staff.
awesome.
They do need to cut off the naughty list though.
I'm working on it.
Hey, I brought toffee today over there. I'm off the naughty list, right? As far as naughty list, if she can switch.
8.5 recommendation.
The council received the attached 2020-2024 capital and special project list for information.
Can I get a second?
Second.
It's information. All in favor? 8.6 scouts.
Sorry, Your Worship, can I maybe just speak to that?
Oh, yeah.
For 30 seconds? Yeah, lots of stuff on there, folks. Everything's in that sort of first column, aside from the stuff we knew was carrying forward from last year. There is way too much, and really, like I mentioned in the report, the idea of this was to get it to you guys as early as possible, so over the Christmas holidays in the next couple of weeks, we can start to really decide where we want to focus for next year. So, definitely open to any and all suggestions.
Any and all suggestions? Well, I don't think we should be doing too much capital special projects because we have a little problem over the hill that we have to deal with. So, since they're not talking to us, I think we should be maybe worrying about that because that's going to be a big expense if it's left on our shoulders. And one council meeting, we've had one board member stand up and say they ain't doing anything with the land. So I think maybe we should scale this back.
I definitely share that concern, Your Worship. That's something you'll see me speak to in those first couple of presentations.
But I just have a problem here. It's too fine a print.
I'll make sure you have a bigger list. It's just the way, it didn't print bigger for me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll
I'll get you a bigger list.
bigger on the PowerPoint. Yeah. But yeah, I agree. We do have to be cautious, I think, in 2020 because the last set of financial statements, the village was sitting on about 5.2 million of total reserves. If we adopt this list and the potential cleanup costs that I've sort of gotten verbal quotes from for the fire site here, if we get to that point, we're going to be using 30-40% of our entire life savings in a single year. That's not a prudent thing to do.
Well, I know we'll need to do an office for the fire chief. We will have to for sure.
Yeah. And that's gonna be the real tricky thing, is looking at this and saying, okay, in light of that, with the potential for that there. And if it doesn't materialize and we're able to partner and, you know, get that site cleaned up as it should, by, in my opinion, the folks that should clean it up, then no problem. Right? We can-
Standard
we can
desk
look
for the
at
village
finding-
office, that can wait.
Yeah. So-
I still got old ones. Gotta work off.
And this was just literally a year-long tally wish list currently in front of you guys, and this is everything that came up, so let's,
Okay, so we can just look this over at Christmas time, Chris?
Yes, please.
Everybody agree? All in favor?
Well, what are we agreeing to? Which one?
We're gonna look at the special projects one. Are you sleeping again?
You need one of your chocolate bars.
8.5. We are looking at.
8.6.
Now we are doing 8.6. And can I get somebody read it?
We are the first off the creek scouts. We are looking to raise $5,000 to help pay for an enclosed trailer to support our volunteer and traffic activities. Shall we go on?
No, just that they want a trailer. That's scouts. Can I have a seconder?
Second.
Discussion?
Well, there's a group that could come to the jamboree and put in
I don't mind giving them a donation for the trailer, but we're not buying the whole thing.
No.
I agree with that. And how much do you guys recommend that we?
Do we have children here who go to the
It
scouts?
says,
It says right there.
This is about
Close
a
to a
third of their
third.
scouts have been here.
And they were all at Remembrance Day, and there was a lot of kids from Goose there, so it's an important program.
Well, just because people show up doesn't mean
no.
Hey,
Why?
these guys do bottle drives, they do all kinds of things to try and raise money.
Popcorn tables.
Yeah.
Apples.
They did apples in the co-op. And they were very polite little boys, and they were from Pooskoopi. And Osprey. So Marcel Woodall is one of the scout leaders, and so is Sam, our bylaw officer.
Yeah, I did it for a long time.
Me too, so did Barb.
So if we buy a bunch of apples from them,
I
then
did,
get the church ladies to bake pies, we could make money here.
for them or us.
In order to get it back to the next group.
But are they asking for money or are they
They're asking-
asking for the logo?
They're asking for
Donation.
donation for them.
And then they would put the logo on the trailer.
But they gotta buy the trailer.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, $1,000?
Sounds good to me.
That sounds pretty high to me, really. I make a motion that we make a donation of $500, providing we have that money available.
And invite them to participate in some of our activities for fundraisings for other fundraisers for them.
I just like to promote this kind of stuff because it keeps the kids off the street when they get a little bit
They take
older.
care of our kids.
Yes.
Second in it.
Second.
We all do
We all
together.
second.
We all second it.
Does that mean everyone's in favor?
Everybody's in favor, Sandy.
Thank you.
So, can I get 8.7?
To request council lobby the PRRD to replace the aging fire department tender truck as soon as possible.
Second.
Which one is the tender truck?
It's one that's parked inside the fire hall that they own. They own these.
I
things.
know that they own one of the trucks, I'm just trying to figure out.
It's not gonna cost.
Doesn't cost us anything. Yeah.
1996?
So this is the oversized truck that we need the addition for?
No.
No, they have to be replaced every 20 years by law.
And this is 24.
Oh, okay.
Well, they don't, not by law, they just have to be recertified, but
They
if the
have to
regional
be.
district is paying for it, then why not?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I make a motion that we let them do.
Yes.
No motion. All in favor?
All in favor?
Good.
And then we have 9.1. Do you guys see any correspondence? I do. I have 9.7. It's a letter that has to be signed by me.
Oh, yes.
It's about the caribou. We did give it to them, but the board decided that it needed to be a little bit revised a little bit more because it was to the point.
Oh, this one.
Yeah, so,
You basically just have to say whether or not you want it signed. 'cause
yeah, I
Tyler
need
has
to
your
know
signature.
if you guys would,
I make the motion that our municipality signs the letter, or our mayor signs on it.
I'll second that.
all in favor? Okay,
And 9.4.
and 9.4?
Council received a letter from Chelsea in the highest of information.
9.4.
Yeah.
Page 41.
44, no, sorry.
Okay.
You jumped ahead.
So they asked me to attend this, and I said I couldn't because I have other commitments.
And I forwarded it to everybody.
Yeah, so I got Sandy to forward it to you guys, so you guys are more than welcome to go to this supper when they hold it.
So where would they put on his best and boost?
So,
Well,
sorry.
Go on, Sandy.
Can I ask- So it's actually not asking you to attend. They want to have a party here in town.
Yeah.
And they want to know, yeah.
yes.
Mhm. And I did give him my blessing, and I
Oh,
told him
did
I
you?
can't attend. So,
Why would they need our permission to have a party?
Well, if you read there, it says they're afraid that they will be harassed by police or community persons. If you look at the second
because they know
paragraph.
that we don't want the drug and alcohol center here, is why. So they're assuming that they're all blackballed because we don't want the alcohol and drug center, which, no, that's
But I
not.
thought we put in there why we didn't.
We did, but you know what, things get
Could we,
spread.
should we send them a letter back saying, or a communication that we'd let?
I did,
Well,
I
you
emailed-
know, we.
I did, I said, give you my blessing to hold a supper, and, but I'm sorry I can't attend due to other commitments.
It's just for information anyways.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe if you're going to respond in writing, CC to the police. Serious, if they're afraid of being harassed by the cops, well, let's let the cops know that they're gonna have this event, and with our
They haven't
community.
rented anything yet. so-
Have we had previous groups harassed by the RCMP in our municipality previously? No.
This is their concern in writing.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, like
So-
she said, it's because of what the place down the hill.
Okay.
9.8, 9.9.
9.8.
All information?
All in for everybody. Oh, no, 9.9, we need to have a little do at that 9.9 one, guys. That's an important one. Our meetings in UBCM were not gone by the wayside, guys. Why are you not?
Slanked out.
No, we're done, it's one more late item.
About the satellite
Thank
office.
you for the meeting with us again this year at UBCM Convention in September and taking the time to bring forward your feedback, our ability to ensure we are responsive to the needs of the communities we serve.
Although I was unable to meet with you personally,
Yeah, but they still, Eric Stubbs we talked to, he was very, very good. Yeah, so we will have our satellite. And they're going to deploy 2 new police officers.
excellent.
Excellent job. So we didn't, our time didn't get wasted, girls.
How was it?
And you too. Girls. Well, we're kind of wondering, you know, it always takes so long, so. What's the girls? The girl.
You opened that one up.
Yeah, I did, didn't I?
Sorry.
I slid right in
No
there.
sympathy.
Resolutions done, blah, 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 done, administration reports, CAO report. Are you gonna read it out?
It's attached.
Are you gonna put it for information?
It's just info.
Is it just simple?
Yeah.
He doesn't wanna read it?
No, that's the whole point.
It's a set.
That's why we asked them to submit it that way.
Should I, oh, I can't harass him. I harassed him to not today. So again, we're just gonna review this, right, Chris?
Yeah, thank you. We'll cross a few of these off as
Which?
Ministry of Environment, the letter
I guess
to
it's done.
CN we can cross off.
Did you hear anything from them?
No, I only sent that email there last week, so.
What about, oh no, North Winds?
They're not getting back to us, so.
You want that off of there?
No, because we're gonna
Okay.
still be persistent.
Okay, then,
Who's not getting back to us?
North.
Have you reached out to?
So we're gonna exhaust every avenue possible, and then the mayor's gonna go.
So you're telling me that Poos Koopy, we run the risk of not developing our community, of not having any services and functions for the community, because North Winds is not,
Refusing to get back to us to tell us what they're gonna do with their property.
And if we have to clean that up?
If we have to clean it up, well, we gotta save our money.
and
They
how much
will
is it
not.
gonna cost us to clean it up?
1.2?
Unofficial verbal estimates from contractors that we've used this summer for various things. I've kind of been asking everybody that question, maybe, it's later, what do you think? Numbers I've gotten between 800 and 1.2.
So how many years are we gonna have to reduce services and not have functions to pay for this 1.2 million that North Winds is not stepping up to the plate and?
Well, I wanna exhaust every avenue first, before the McKenny reared my ugly head gets fired up.
So, and like I mentioned, earlier in the meeting too, we're
That's
setting about $5 million, give or take, of reserves. So, an activity like that would literally burn through 25% of our life savings in a completely unexpected, expenditures.
I think it's very rude of them not even keeping us in the loop of what they're doing and what they're up to. I think it's very rude.
Well, maybe they don't know, they're,
But they can give us some,
Respond.
we don't know anything, we can get back to you, but right now, to me, this is rude. This is completely rude. That's all I have to say.
And we would, of course, if I may, your worship, pursue recovery of those expenses by every legal means at our disposal. But, regardless, if we're back into that corner, we would have to write the contractor the check to do the work and then pursue recovery of the funds after.
do you need a motion to pursue legal remedies?
I'm going to bring that
Oh,
forward
we're not
in
doing
January.
Councilors' calendars. Oh, it's that part.
Yeah.
I would just like to remind counselors that I need their financial disclosure statements.
I
in
sent you
January.
mine,
Yes.
and I gave ours.
Two people have returned theirs, but I still have 3 counselors that I need your financial disclosure
Didn't I give you
statements.
mine?
You good?
Oh, you have them all?
No, I put a couple on your desk in a folder.
Oh, is that what's in there? Okay, sorry, I'll check. Okay,
It's
I
not-
take it back,
No,
I take
it's
it
not
back.
everybody's though, Sandy.
Mine is.
Well, I have Barb's and I have Lorraine's.
Okay.
They sent them to me directly.
Okay, and I know
Mine's is there.
Yeah,
Because I did mine.
Marlene, did you give yours to,
I don't even know what you're talking about.
it was on your desk, last council meeting. Skylar left it there for you guys.
Oh, your yacht that you have
I have
on
it.
the Goose River.
It's not on my desk,
You have
so
it
I'm gonna go
where?
looking.
Oh.
I cleared my desk.
Yeah.
And it's this big, you remember that? Your vineyard over across the road.
I am so lost in my life. Like, I don't know whether I'm coming or going.
I don't know if I'm leaving either.
Yeah, remember, I kept thinking in your brain, what am I right here, what am I right here?
Like, who knows their name
I
tag?
have Phil's, I have Donna's, and there's an extra one, you would have grabbed it with all your stuff.
Oh, thank
You have
you.
one.
I don't need it till January 15th. I have yours, yes. Yes, I have yours, thank you.
That's what I said, because I kept thinking everybody's
That's rock and roll. Okay, anybody see anything on their calendars? Nope, okay, we're good.
Just one in
20th
20th
of,
of November, or January?
December.
December, oh yeah.
Friday.
We have the supper, senior supper.
How many do we have?
40.
40.
Nice, 41.
41? Did you put it in?
Did you put it in?
No.
Oh, we said we needed to know.
Is it at the community center or
Yes.
the senior center?
No, it's at the community center.
So there's just one?
I need
She's gonna go by
to.
herself?
Well, no,
So 3?
sure.
So 43?
Can we do that?
so that would be 44.
You're lucky. You're just lucky. Is your mom going
What?
to the senior supper?
So how many do I have?
43.
And that starts at 2 o'clock, isn't it?
No, who said 4:30?
4:30 it starts, the door's open.
Okay, what time is supper though?
6, I think.
Is that kind of late for the old people?
5:30 maybe.
Don't they usually give it like 5 or 5:30?
Dawn and Bart.
Because they go to bed at 7?
Yeah.
Some go to bed at 4.
Well, there you go. They have
So,
dinner.
yeah, we need to find out.
Yeah, I gotta figure out how I'm gonna get into the kitchen early in the morning to get the turkeys in the oven.
At the community center?
Yeah.
Just come here and see the girls, they'll give you keys and the code to the alarm and you can get in there.
Okay, Counselor Smith, might as well start talking about your report and keep talking about senior supper.
And the what?
Smith or White? Who's going first?
Wait, sorry, wait. Sorry, Barbara called her Smith. I was looking directly at her.
We always get our names mixed up here somehow. Went to the meet and greet for the hockey thing, and I have the agenda from the library.
Okay.
That's it, I think.
Counselor Smith.
I went to the staff Christmas party. It was fun.
Yes, that was a very
Oh, yeah.
smart idea you did, that was awesome.
We have awesome staff and it's just Barton's way of saying thank you.
That's good.
Lumps of coal? Did you get lumps of coal too?
No,
You didn't?
no, you got lumps of coal.
Oh,
She must
he
not like
ate it. He probably ate his, didn't know.
I appreciate you letting me mix staff all present.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
I went to the Chamber of Commerce luncheon at the art gallery last night. And Councillor Jeremy called me over and would like me to represent POOS. Community Futures had applied through Northern Trust to get some money in a kitty, and all the municipalities in South Peace are put money in. And we've let it grow, so now that we can start giving away the interest. We're not gonna touch this is
The principal.
the principal. So they wanted a representative from POOS, so they asked me to go tomorrow at 12 noon for a meeting. Jeremy's going. And I'm gonna go and find out what it's all about, because I had previously been looking at the Poultry House contribution from the village. So I'll bring that all back
When's
to
your
you.
next poultry house?
Meeting. It could, I think it's tomorrow night, I'm not sure.
So can we have a motion for Barb to give the interest to the poultry house?
Okay,
Because we're going to the meeting tomorrow at noon. The poultry house needs money,
yes.
and we need to contribute. We can't be like other communities that haven't contributed.
No, and,
And we,
Where's the interest coming from?
well, the NDIT and the previous council gave,
we got it sort of
Sue Kenny money.
doubled up. If we
Okay.
give 10,000, we had 20,000 through NDIT put in
But
this
we gave
kit.
50,
Yes.
previous council,
Yes.
previous mayor.
Yeah, you guys might recall, that's the one I was talking about a number of months ago.
That we were trying to get back.
Yeah, so, and it was quite the hiccup to try and get the funds out, and after, a couple of months of going back and forth and talking to the Foundations of Canada organization, I ended up having a conversation with NDIT, who said very straightforward that the 50,000 that they matched was specific to that program. So if our seed capital was pulled out, which it could be, they would unfortunately have to claw that back, which.
So do we get our own interest?
Well, this is why I'm gonna go to the meeting.
Okay.
I want to find out why, because now we know that money's there. Are they looking at doling out now? Like, have they doled out last year? Did they do, you know what I mean?
I want $1,000 a pop.
That's all, but there's more, and I think it's grown to 600 and.
Yeah, it's over 600,000. It's set up as an endowment fund, which means that the principal has to stay there and they can distribute whatever interest is generated in $1,000 increments. I did get some information on what they doled out, or allocated, I guess is a better word, over the last few years, and it was between $3,000 to $6,000 in years that there was interest, and there was a couple of years over the last 4 or 5 where there were no donations, either through no applications or there wasn't actually a positive investment gain in that year at Denver College.
So can you find out from Sue how much interest we have?
That's something that I'm sure they'll share.
With our.
Yeah,
But
no,
we should, before the 31st of December, donate to the Vulture House.
I don't believe it's actually us that passes that motion. I think part of that relationship was that we donated the money to the organization and
Is
their
this
board,
group
and-
now?
and these folks decide, yeah.
Okay, so we should be giving the Vulture House some money.
That's actually. one
Do
of
we
the
have any
special projects.
money that we haven't spent for discretionary means that we could give to the Poultry House for 2019?
We do.
Is Butcher's House just strictly a donation?
Yeah.
It's just on donations from businesses and communities?
Yes, and
And
we're
so-
trying to get grants to build it and renovate it.
Well, isn't that what's happening now?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, do they have a business plan on how this is going to work?
Yes,
Yeah.
we have it all.
We have
discussed it.
Oh, I had not been here when Shirley came and did a presentation on it.
I remember she was here, but I don't remember what she said about. what
This
they
money
were
that we
doing.
was a long
want,
time
we've
ago
got to
for
be
us.
sustainable, so there'll be
Right.
an upkeep, an annual upkeep to maintain this house. And if we could get these communities in the southeast to contribute, that helps us.
Well, we
Like
can
First
try.
Nations have contributed money, Peace River Regional District has been phenomenal.
Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. So yeah, that capital and special projects list that everybody's gonna digest over Christmas, that has 50,000 on there for that number that's come up a couple of times, in meetings. That would be a direct single contribution, but to answer, I think your question earlier, Councilor Smith, you guys still have, over half of your council expenses, initiatives donation account for the year. So if there's something you'd like to allocate this year, yeah, I've got the,
And we have till the 31st to do something.
actually, you've got this meeting, Councilor Smith,
Yeah,
because I would need a motion
that's
from
why I'm
council
doing the
to
motion.
pull money out of there, but anywhere up to about $10,000 would be acceptable tonight. There's 8,200, I believe. Yeah, 8,276. We just allocated another 500 for the scouts from that account. So, yeah, anywhere up to 11,000 and some change if you guys. There's nothing else that's bubbled up for the year. You had 20,000 in that budget that was approved multiple times throughout the budget process.
Yeah, Big's Furniture gave them a couch and a chair and a whole bunch of stuff, right? So
Certainly within your guys' discretion right here and now, if you feel, you want to support the organization for calendar 2019. And
well, I
that-
think so, because we have residents that are gonna have family that will probably use it. They'll come from Prince George or Fort
Fort
Nelson or Fort St. John,
Thompson.
Tom's Lake, any of that area. So I'm thinking that we should be donating some money.
That books the expense to
I'm not
this
sure,
year as
but-
well. That doesn't preclude you from again doing something else in
In
2020.
Well, yes, they would like us to do it at a certain annual thing.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not gonna bring up amount because I am on the board, so I'm gonna let you guys think what you wanna do.
I'll leave it to you three, because it's kind of my passion. So I really don't, I would give them the 50 grand.
No,
That's a lot.
I know, but that gives us a whole room, that would just,
listen,
that would do a whole
room.
Yeah, my bed,
the,
beds, the whole nine yards.
Do an entire house,
Yeah.
50 grand.
didn't we already provide a contribution in kind with manpower?
Oh, yes, we did, every municipality has done that, and they have been using that. In kind, the administration, the Peace River Regional District, us, Dawson Creek. Yes, we did.
Who did we do?
And I, listen, I am urging fiscal restraint, even though it's a good cause, we're not the only organization in the piece, right? If we're looking at having to spend $1.2 million to clean up this mess, that's Northwind's responsibility that they're weaseling out of, or trying to, or whatever, not paying, not stepping up to the stone. And we have to cut back services for our community. We have to go without a new subdivision for our community. We have to go without a new extension to our school in this community because Northwinds is not stepping up to the plate. Then we can't be giving away $50,000 in a donation.
We're not looking at.
We're not, I was kidding, Ken, I'm thinking of $2,500 or even $1,500 or $500. Just
When-
give them something.
When we have Northwinds who are not paying their money, which we will have to pay,
We can give them $500.
We can give them 1,000, I make a motion for 1,000.
motion's on the floor.
All in favor? Or second it? You do second. All in favor? He had to have his little rant.
Thank you.
Okay, you done, Barbie? Sorry, but I had to interrupt you there because I knew you'd forget about the motion. Council Hebert.
You've got all the names.
Oh, I passed it to Sandy.
Oh, it doesn't have names, all it has is
No, yeah,
addresses.
sorry.
And Colleen and Skylar will,
But at least we can.
We'll
have
announce
this
the three
this time.
winners.
well, they're gonna find the names and they have to phone the
Yeah.
people.
Okay. We
So
don't, we
once
don't need
they-
to connect the addresses.
No.
No, because that's a privacy issue.
Yeah, that's.
Congratulations!
Can we tell the address?
No,
No.
it's privacy thing.
Yes. We did go on a nice drive though.
I know we did, we didn't have to count
Darn,
fire
last
this
night.
time.
It was very lovely. Yeah, last Saturday, it wasn't last Saturday, we went to a supper for the museum.
Oh, yes, I
Yeah, so busy. We see what. That's it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, fun. Had fun. Well, I got these all mixed up and all in a row, but, okay, Ken?
So, as you guys remember, last year, you scheduled a Christmas dinner for the staff while I was away.
Well, that's because you went on holidays and we're having fun.
Well, it doesn't
You
matter,
went to
you
Disney.
scheduled it while I was gone. So to make up for it, I went and I had 2 plates this year.
Good for you, you should have had 3.
And harassed me. And told me about it, it's a joke. Made me blush.
We got some stuff coming up in January for courtesy matters in the Peace River Regional District and the Solid Waste Committee. But with regards to the last 2 weeks, it was just the dinner with you delightful people. We're so glad to attend, enjoying it. My wife loved it and I loved her being there. What I would like to do is just to take a minute and wish the citizens of Pooskoopi a very Merry Christmas and a happy new year. And I hope that for all of us, a healthy and prosperous 2020.
Same to you, Ken. Okay, my turn. Okay, this is all mixed up. When
Yeah,
meet
it's written down somewhere.
meet and greet with the hockey players. Well, not from the hockey players, but it was the Hockey Canada people.
Yeah.
And then I think earlier that day, I can't remember, it was in Northern Lights College luncheon. Oh my God, I was so spoiled. That was just a delicious meal. And that was put on by the board of directors. Then I went to staff Christmas party. Then I went to regional district and we discussed that letter. And then I went to the fire department Christmas party and gave out awards to the firemen last night. It was so nice. Here I thought it was a fire hall.
Yeah.
And then I text Blair and he said, no, it's at the Fix. So then it became a Christmas party. So I got a free meal. It was so fun.
They did
They fed me, yes, it was so good. And then we had a conference call for the climate change strategy today with me and Chris. First, but anyway, I won't say that out loud. And I think we should put a motion on the floor for that buddy bench for the school.
I make,
I'll second.
Joanna,
I'll second.
I'll listen to.
All those in favor? Then I went to the museum supper. And then I would like a delegation for Rob Brown to come and talk over his movie. Can I have
It
a,
won't be till February.
whatever.
Okay.
Can I have a seconder?
Sure.
Any discussions? No. Okay.
Well,
You can hold your discussions till that meeting.
So mostly all you've been doing is just pigging out.
Yes, and it's been a very lovely, lovely time. I've been really busy at the office too. But again, I would like to wish the residents and everybody very, very Merry Christmas. I would like to thank all the staff for their hard work, Public Works, the fire department, the village office, the museum, and all the churches. I'd like to wish you guys all a Merry Christmas. The library, Courtney, especially Courtney. Gotta do Courtney. Merry Christmas, everybody. And can I have a
Motion to move in camera?